Hello and welcome back to the workshop. In today's video we're going to be looking at headsets, how to adjust them and if necessary replace them. Let's get straight to it. So all bicycles have a headset of some description to allow the bike to steer, the handlebars to turn. This is the head tube on the bike, and at the top a bearing and at the bottom another bearing. And if adjusted properly, the steering will move smoothly from side to side with no creaking or groaning. Try bouncing the bike. If it is nice and quiet, this one is, it's a good indication that the headset is properly adjusted. The headset needs to be tight enough so there is no free movement, but not so tight that it binds. One way of checking this: put your hand around the top of the head tube and the bottom or the top of the headset, where my hand is now. Rock the bike back and forward. If you can feel movement, it's an indication that the bearing itself or the adjuster needs tightening slightly. It can also be achieved by just turning the wheel to 90 degrees and pushing on the stem, and again holding your hand around that joint to feel any movement. Let's have a closer look though, just to see what I mean by movement. I've loosened this one off considerably, and you can hear that it rattles when bounced now, and that same noise may well appear if you're riding on rough roads or bumpy surfaces. And rocking it back and forward, you can just see between the white frame and the bottom of the black spacer of the headset mechanism a slight movement there. That really shouldn't be moving at all. So to service the headset, best to put the bike up on the stand, remove the front wheel, the top cap and the bolt in the middle at the top of the headset that I'm pointing to now adjusts the pressure on the bearings and in effect pushes the stem down towards the steerer tube or the forks, or if you like pulls the forks up towards the stem. To access the bearings, the stem needs to be removed. Just use a 5mm typical size Allen key to remove the top cap and bolt and put somewhere safe. And then the two bolts on the side of the stem can be removed, quite often a 3, 4 or 5mm Allen key. And you can just see below the top of the stem the silver steel tube on this particular bike of the steerer attached to the fork itself. And it is important that there remains a gap between the top of the stem and the steerer tube itself, otherwise there's nothing to compress onto. Once those two bolts are undone, grab hold of the forks, hold on to them in case they drop out of the bottom of the frame, and just pull the stem and handlebars off, removing the spacers next. Just remember how many spacers there are below the stem, as they can. This is one way of adjusting the height of the handlebars. I've just put 2 spacers back on here as a demonstration, and the third one on top, and then the stem can go back on top of that. So it's up to you where those spacers sit, but typically if you've taken them off, put them back the same way that you have removed them. Take a firm grip of the forks themselves and they should slide down through the frame and out of the bottom. No need to detach the brake cables or any others at this stage. The sort of top spacer, lift that off, and underneath that there is a compression ring, that little silver one, and then the bearing visible. Just pulled that out with my finger, and there will be a similar bearing underneath. Quite often the bottom bearing is a larger bearing, as that is the bearing that takes all of the load. And if you notice sort of brown gunk running out of the bottom of the head tube, it's a good indication that the bearings themselves are worn. Though worth noting, bearings can be worn and still feel pretty okay. A good sign that they are wearing, even if they do feel okay, is that the pressure on the headset, the bearings themselves, need to be adjusted fairly frequently. In other words, the headset is coming loose. Check the bearings, just push your fingers inside, turn them around from both sides just to get the feel of that. It should all be running perfectly smoothly. If any roughness is detected, time to change the bearing. Give everything a good clean, just grease lightly, and then the reassembly process can begin. But as a quick aside to that, if you need to replace a bearing, this is a different one but still from a headset, quite often the bearings will have a number on the rubber seal, which is fairly easy to look up, or sometimes that model or designator can be stamped on the steel ring itself, and if not, then the only way to really get the exact same size is to measure it, both the width there, the inside diameter, I should say the outside diameter, then the inside diameter, and this, the smallest dimension, is referred to as the width itself. Be aware that bearings can be 0.1 of a millimeter different. So after cleaning the bearings or replacing as required, the fork steerer tube can be pushed up through the frame, the compression ring, the bottom spacer, and then the desired number of spacers to set the height of the handlebars. In this case, of course, it was 3 to start with, so I will put 3 back in. Then the handlebars themselves can be fitted on top. Just be careful the fork doesn't drop out of the bottom of the frame. Top cap can be screwed in lightly, and that will stop the fork falling out of the bottom of the frame. At this stage I like to put the wheel back in, as it helps with alignment of the stem, the wheel and the frame. We want everything pointing in exactly the same direction, otherwise it's a little off-putting, seeing that the steering is perhaps a little off to the left or the right. The pressure or the headset adjustment can be made now by tightening the bolt on the top cap. It doesn't need to be overly tight, it's just tightening it enough to ensure that there is no free play movement, as demonstrated earlier, rocking back and forward, and that the bars turn very smoothly from left to right. No binding, no grinding or any other funny noises. Once the headset is adjusted properly through that bolt on the top cap, check the alignment. I tend to put the wheel between my legs and align the stem and the frame all together. Take the bike off the stand if you have one. Check again, as demonstrated earlier, that there is no rocking movement in that joint between the headset and the frame. Make sure the bars are rotating nice and smoothly. Have a quick look at alignment again, and then the very last thing to do is tighten up the 2 pinch bolts on the stem itself. And the stem, an important junction of course, that holds the bars onto the fork steerer tube. For this particular frame, the bolts are set at 9 Newton meters as indicated on the stem itself. Carbon ones will typically be around 5 to 6, but all stems somewhere should have a number on them indicating at what torque the bolt should be set. Tighten these up one at a time, or one at a time evenly I should say, a little bit on one, then a little bit more on the next one. Don't just do one all at once and then the next, otherwise it creates undue pressure across that structure. Once you've finished tightening these 2 bolts, you are ready to go with a headset in hopefully great condition. Do remember, a loose headset can be dangerous, can impact high-speed handling, particularly downhill or on rough roads, and I have seen cases of very worn headsets jamming going around a corner. You definitely don't want that. Thank you all for watching. Please leave comments below if there's anything else you'd like to see. Don't forget to like and subscribe.